Welcome to Grow with Purpose. Glad to have you with us. And I am joined today by Tommy Rohrlack. Tommy is one of our senior advisors. So welcome, Tommy. It's been a while since I got to see you on the podcast.
Yeah, it has been a while. I appreciate you having me. Happy to be here.
So we're going to be talking today about accountability at the very top of the organization. And these are some of the hardest conversations to have. And we're going to talk about how you have the conversation and when you have the conversation, and just kind of flesh that out, because you and I, we're always, the consulting team at Axiom is always comparing notes. And we don't get to do this every day, thank goodness, right? Like, because these are not exactly, I think we all walk into these conversations, looking to each other, being like, all right, like, talk me up, put me in, coach, pump me up, get me in there. Because it's high stakes, and so we wanted to unpack this a little bit today, and I asked you to come on because we've had some of those cases we've done together. You've had some you've done on your own, and just start to unpack this. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and I want to get your perspective on each of these. So the first one: why are these hard performance conversations with leadership team members often the most difficult ones for a CEO to have?
Yeah, well, first I want to address something you said earlier too, and why it's so important, that so helpful, for me, for our whole team, that we have each other to lean on and to go to, share these stories with, get help, get insight, because at the end of the day, uh, it's people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, I mean, that's not even leadership, that's the entire team. We're not dealing with something that you can throw a tool at or bring out the whiteboard and map out a workflow and solve it. These
Right.
are people issues, and so it is super helpful. So yeah, happy to be here to dive into this. But to answer your question, I think it's harder for a few reasons. One, it affects the whole team when someone in leadership is underperforming, for myriad of reasons, right? That impact has more at stake, being that that person is leading other people. They have more of a responsibility than those not at the leadership table. And by saying more at stake, I do think that goes both ways. Obviously, the impact of their lack of performance is greater, but so is the impact of not addressing it head
Mm-hmm.
on. That's substantially greater. So I think that's one reason, is just the reality of this isn't just another conversation for the CEO, for the owner. But also, most of the time, the CEO has a lot invested in that person emotionally, literal time, financial resources. There's history, there's trust, there's oftentimes, unfortunately, I hope that due to those things, the relationship, history, trust, that things will just passively get better. But that's why it's uncomfortable, right? I mean, at the end of the day, hard conversations are hard because they matter. So I think that's something that, if we could get every CEO just to fully understand that they're not supposed to be easy, they're not supposed to be fun, they're hard for a reason, but it's important still to have them.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about that small group, and it's usually 4 or 5 people who are at the table with the owner of the business, who are the leadership team. That's the formal term we would have for that group. The Certainly the consequences. Like, I think one thing happens is we always go to the worst case scenario. Like, the business
Hmm.
owner's sitting there thinking, and they've told this to us before, is like, well, what if they leave? They could just,
Yep.
if I bring this up, they could just up and quit. And then where would we
Hmm.
be? And that would be, we
Yep.
can't afford that. Look at, you're talking about this being a people problem. Think about all the people that we might have to lay off if their business unit went away or whatever. And so part of it is just, imagining that worst case scenario, and maybe making it a bigger consequence than is likely to happen. Not saying it's out of the realm of possibility. It's always a chance there, but it's probably pretty remote.
Right.
Probably pretty remote. The other thing
Yeah.
that comes to mind as you were talking, like the the peers of this individual who's on the leadership team. These are usually like the brightest, smartest, most
Hmm.
competent, most accomplished, most accountable people in the organization. So if there have been issues, whether that is behavior issues or performance issues, they're not blind to it, right? There was chairman of Southwest Airlines, I think it's Herb Kelleher, he's famously quoted as saying, if you're the CEO of the organization and you're in the shower one morning and you think to yourself, I probably need to let this person go, the first thing you should do is drive to the office, call that person in your office and let them go for two reasons. Number one, you're the only person who can do it. Otherwise, they would have been gone already. And number two, everybody knows that they need to go. And so I think of that anecdote because that's often the case here. The entire leadership team knows, man, there's a big issue. And the owner knows there's a big issue. And the owner knows that the other leadership team knows there's a big issue. So now there's just this compounding pressure of this could go really, really bad. It could be really, really good. But, either way, it's going to have a big impact on the business. I think one of the things we try to press is, well, if you do nothing, like you just said, the consequences of them continuing to underperform could be the worst case scenario. You think about that for a second. So when you talk about these situations, what usually goes wrong after an owner realizes that somebody on the leadership team isn't meeting expectations? How does that show up?
I think, unfortunately, most consistently, it's really what you just said. It's a lack of movement, indecision. But ultimately, though, indecision is still a decision. It's still you're acting, you're choosing to not do something. I mean, like you just said, the leadership team around them at the table, but of course the owner, they see the issues, they feel it, they just don't want to deal with it head on, and that's kind of back to that first question for all those reasons. As you were talking, this quote or saying came to mind. I don't remember where it originally came from, or I don't know where it came from, but I know actually Jeremy Fowler, former AD for UF, the original quote is, if you have to do something eventually, you might as well do it immediately. And Jeremy Fowler kind of fine-tuned it to what must be done eventually must be done immediately. And I think that's it. I think that perfectly captures it. The longer you wait, the longer you punt, avoiding it doesn't protect the standards we've set, doesn't protect the culture, it doesn't protect that relationship that we talked about a minute ago. It's slowly weakening everything. It's making what is just a hard conversation turn into a even harder conversation that's going to end in a train wreck. So the first thing would just be the unnecessary delay, even though it's very clear in their mind. But another thing that I've seen a handful of times is, as we've said, it's not just the owner. Well, it might be the owner one-to-one, right, having these conversations, but it's not just the owner around the leadership table. There's, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 other people. And so what I've seen a few times is a lack of alignment among the leadership team, which can be dangerous if, let's say, it's not just a one-to-one when you finally do have that discussion with this individual. So let's say it's the owner, this individual, and someone that they're shoulder to shoulder with. Well, if they have different views on the severity of the issue, if they have different views on how we got here, if they have different views on are we even here? Do they even see the issue? Which, if not, I think that's a whole nother podcast topic.
Yeah.
And of course, the path forward, like what are we actually doing? Gosh, that's bad. The person's going to end up hearing mixed signals. It could very well get watered down. There's not going to be clarification. So the person's going to walk away thinking, I think I did something wrong, but I'm not really sure because I just heard like 3 different things. I don't know what this means. So that's super dangerous. In that case, it's simple. Prepare. Invest in the now so you can properly discuss and invest in the person when you need to. It's just so important that leaders are aligned on those things I just mentioned, right? The expectations, the roles, consequences, for lack of better words. There has to be one voice in the room. One message is probably the better word. And that comes from just preparing. So that might look like the owner and the other leader or leaders having, taken time on their own to discuss this and plan for it and come to an agreement. And if you don't do that, like I said, it's just super dangerous.
It's super insightful what you just said. So we talk about a leadership team, but there is a leader of the leadership team. In any organization,
Mm-hmm.
there has to be a leader. There's,
Mm-hmm.
by committee, a lot of things can go bad. And what you just said is it is on that leader, it's their responsibility to get to the alignment. And we've seen that go both ways. Like we've seen the leader be persuaded that, well, maybe you're thinking about this, in a little bit maybe nearsighted or too harsh, or you're seeing some aspects of performance, we're seeing other things. And so sometimes the leader might have to temper, their view and get in alignment with some of the other members of the leadership team. But I think it's more common that the leader needs to make sure that there's alignment. And there might be times where they have to say, and I'm not saying, my way or the highway, you got to get on board with this, but there might be times where they just have to say, if it's behavioral stuff, which I've seen probably the most often, is a lot of times it's not performance so much as it's behavior. It's having somebody who's really not all in on the company values, who's on the leadership team.
Yeah.
And sometimes it may require the leader to just have that hard conversation with the other individuals who are saying, this is not that big of a deal, it's going to cost us too much money. And these are the other leaders in the organization, and say, but you have to understand there's something here that's non-negotiable from my perspective as the owner of the business and the leader here. This is non-negotiable. And it would be the same as if it were you. It would be the same as if it were my son or daughter. It'd be the same as if it was our top performing person who was going to succeed me as CEO. This is the standard. And if you're not okay with that, then you and I are going to have our own form of a hard conversation at some point down the road. That may not be today, but I'm telling you, I'm playing this tape forward and I'm not willing to live with the consequence. So can we be of one voice on this or not? And sometimes you might have to slow the scheduling of that next hard conversation that was the one you thought that was the primary one. You have to slow that down until you can work through some of these other hard conversations so that there can be alignment, because what you pointed out is that if the leadership team isn't aligned on this, no matter how good the CEO thinks that conversation went with the individual who they imagined they were going to have the hard conversation with, things are going to go south down the road because the team is not unified in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to touch on something you said as well. We've heard it so many times where the excuse, the response, the argument is like, we just can't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
And the CEO is like, I mean, you're not wrong. And don't get me wrong, I think there can be a degree of understanding, maybe validity is the right word to that, in the short term.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the cost of not doing this? Right? If it's, right now it's February 5th, you're a CPA, it's getting close to April. And if we have someone who's, let's say we're talking about someone at a CPA firm right now, well, as we get into the weeks leading up to that date, I would understand, let's be wise about this. But what happens when we're talking about next year
Mm-hmm.
and that person's challenges, whether it's just a lack of leading other people well, a lack of executing well, a lack of buying into the company's standards and values? What happens if that hurts us as a business next year and the next year and the next year? I get your argument for right here and now. I think that's a whole nother topic on whether that's right or wrong. I'm not saying solely that it is, but I definitely do not get the argument long term. So I think the response to, well, we can't afford that, is we can't afford not to do this.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why the owner sees that more clearly. He or she is the owner. We're talking about one single person with the risk, the financial investment. They see it like that. So it's always a little bit harder to get the other leaders to see it like that as well.
Yeah.
So.
When you look at these situations, what are some of the signs or signals that somebody's struggling in a leadership role and we might be headed for one of these hard conversations?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think one of the toughest things is that someone can be, oftentimes they are actually, because they got to the leadership table for a reason. They're great technically. They're a great operator. They're great at what they do, but they still might not be leading well. So what that looks like is the litmus test is look to the people around them. Real leadership is servant leadership, right? We say that all the time at Axiom. We believe that wholeheartedly. We believe the teams that we work with, and all, I mean, every business, even those that we don't, should lean into that. And so what does that mean? That's the people that you lead are growing, the people that you lead are getting better, the people that you lead are looking for ways to lead their peers shoulder to shoulder. Leadership becomes culture, the culture of the business. And so your successes are their successes, your failures are their failures. Um, but oftentimes we ignore that because they're so good at what they do. The end product, the end result is great, or they're bringing in X amount of revenue. But kind of back to the, well, can we afford it or can we afford not to? Well, what happens when the people that are under them, looking at the org chart, people that are under them, that they lead, their direct reports, well, they're not succeeding or they're not executing well. And just for conversation's sake, it's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of desire. It's not a lack of their ability between the ears to process their roles and responsibilities. It's a lack of their leader.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, we can ignore this because the leader's doing really well. That's something that so often happens, again, because we look at the here and now, or so many CEOs and leadership teams look at the here and now and get satisfied because they're performing well.
Yeah.
Well, a super clear sign that this is getting really dangerous is look to the people that they're leading.
Yeah.
How are they doing?
Yeah, and we could talk about metrics around, attrition or the opposite, retention within
Yeah.
a department. But I think those are a lot of times the sample size isn't large enough for that to be meaningful. So, it's like if you got a department of 3 and, one person leaves every year, that's not good. But, if you've got a department of 20, that same metric, is going to be somewhere around 8 people, 7 people a year are leaving. Now it's really obvious, right? So sometimes the people around the leadership team table, that's not a good enough measure. It really, it requires you, if you're going to be concerned about the people who are suffering the consequences of poor leadership, just to ask a much more nuanced question: are these people thriving?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a harder question to answer because you're probably going to have to go have some one-on-one conversations, maybe a series of them. And it's not like you can go start having those conversations now. You have to really be in touch, or somebody in the leadership team has to be in touch with what's the pulse of that group that is, underneath this person. And we've seen it with every single position on the leadership team. We've seen it with the controller, is the person that we're talking about. We've seen it with sales managers. We've seen it with general managers. We've seen it with operations managers. We've seen it with HR managers. So like, it's not like there's one problem child that sits in that seat. It's everybody is subject to this kind of struggle. And when you talk about recognizing that it is a struggle, how does a CEO recognize? They kind of see the problem, right? They're like, yeah, but here, Tommy, tell you what. I'll give you one. Tell you what, Tommy. Why don't you coach this person up, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, please don't ask me to do that, right? Or not that we would shy away from that, but these are situations where that coaching should have been part and parcel of the work we were doing from day one. Like, there's no Band-Aid fix for this. Or they say, maybe somebody out there is listening to this and like, you know what, I'm just going to go get this person some coaching. And there are, I would say that's great. Like, there's a lot of these situations where that's exactly what's needed. But how does the CEO recognize when support and coaching aren't going to be enough? And there's probably going to be a need for the person's level of responsibility. Let's not talk about, you're not right for this organization. Like, let's say it's not necessarily a values issue that would require them to give up their seat on the bus. Let's say that's more something else. How does somebody recognize, CEO recognize, when support and coaching aren't necessarily going to be enough? We're talking about they've maybe hit a ceiling for their capability, capacity, and there's going to have to be a different role for them in the organization.
Yeah, well, coaching should, whether it's the same the same dynamic with the CEO or just a different dynamic, coaching just conceptually should definitely always continue. Every now and then, I'll hear a few times like, I don't do the one-to-ones with them anymore. They walk away and they don't do anything. They just don't listen. So I've given up.
Mm.
You've given up. Great. We aggressively disagree with that. Coaching should always continue. We always want to try to help someone grow. But yeah, to your point, I think there can be times when coaching alone, regardless of who is the one doing it, of the coach, just isn't enough. The issue might be effort, it might not be, might be maturity, it might not be. It could be that the role is just bigger than where that person is right now. If I can word it that way, just it's too much, which then is the whole question, the whole conversation around um, what is the criteria, the leadership criteria, leadership indicators, and we have a ton of podcasts and blogs on leadership affirmations and what servant leadership means. So I won't get into all that right now. Um, but when the same patterns, the same nodding my head because I want you to think that I understand, and then walking away and doing the exact opposite. When that happens, time after time, these same patterns keep showing up, even after support and clarity, and maybe even bringing in other people from the leadership team. Um, if we can, something that I always say is, as just kind of a test, is if you can put your head on the pillow at night, knowing that you have done everything that you can do for that person in their role right now. Again, I'm not saying stop coaching, but you're investing your time. You're continuing to live out what it means to be a servant leader. You know that you're not ignoring certain things or asking them something that is just heinously not on their roles and responsibilities. If that's the case, that's when a reset is usually needed. Um, but again, coaching should definitely always continue. It's just going to look a little bit different based on what that person needs, I think.
So you've seen the patterns haven't changed. It's the same nodding the head yes, but then nothing ever changes. Um, they're not, they're showing up for meetings, but they're really not engaged. I okay, Tommy, you're right. I need to have a hard conversation with this person. And you and I have both sat, and sometimes they'll ask us to kind of sit in a co-pilot seat. Often, that is the role that we serve with these conversations because they're very high stakes, and it's uncomfortable, sure, but that's what we're there for. Right? And again, I think every single one of us, um, there's a little bit of anxiety, but those are also the days when you're like, that's what God put me here for, right? This is
Hmm.
this is this is the day. This is a day that's going to be a difference maker. So there's
Yeah.
also some adrenaline, and we want to show up and do well. And then we show up. Maybe we've gone through the talking points, and there's a few kind of specific things, specific examples that we're going to use to illustrate if this is something that's going to require a role change, and we might anticipate some pushback. And then we get in there, and the CEO just totally wusses out. Right? And
We've seen it.
yeah, so
We're like, what?
what does it look like to have a hard performance conversation with some real clarity instead of softening? And why is that clarity so important?
I think yeah, it's a great question because we definitely seen that. Ambiguity, lack of clarity, whatever we want to call it, it creates false expectations. It hurts everyone, not just that individual. We've talked about the people that they lead, other people in the company. It hurts them. I would even argue it's a pretty easy argument actually. It hurts our customers, our clients,
Mm.
and that's just because we're trying to soften the conversation. We're back to that very first point. A hard conversation should be hard. I think a clear conversation sounds like this, whether it's 30 minutes, an hour, 10 minutes. It's uh, here's what's going well, here's what's not, and here's what's going to change. It's saying the hard things, not cruelly, but being clear, being clean in how you say it. And also, it's not kind of to the point you just said when owners will kind of riff and they start talking. Next thing you know, I don't even think they know what they're saying. Sometimes it's because they want to soften and add almost like a compliment sandwich. What I'm not saying, there's a space for the good things, right? I would actually argue that it should have the good things because if there's zero of that, well, then we need to have a much harder conversation, not what does this look like moving forward. Uh, but the point that I'm making is it's not vague encouragement. It's not, but I'm going to water that down because you're doing really well. That just completely misses the mark. And I know it's harder. It might not sound nicer in the moment, but ultimately it is the best thing for, again, them, clients, each other. And also, it's super important to, back to our point that we addressed about preparing and being on the same page, just like not hoping that certain questions come up in the meeting.
Mm.
Well, I don't really have this part figured out. I'm going to kind of see how he responds, and I'm sure he'll shoot me an email next week to ask for some clarity, but I'll have more time to think about it. Train wreck. What happens when he does ask and we don't know what we're going to say? So
Yeah.
this plan of, I really don't know. I don't have my mind wrapped around that. I'm just going to hope it doesn't come up. That's not a good idea either.
Mhm.
And I just touched on this a second ago, but probably the most important thing is the importance of a CEO leading this meeting, both literally, I do think, I would argue, the beginning of it, but also just conceptually leading the entire thing with both humility and accountability, right?
Mm.
Owning where, if it's applicable, but owning where he or she could have set a better example, been clearer in expectations, things like that. I mean, they can and should, I would argue, say those things without lowering the standard.
Mhm.
And also, this came to mind. You brought up values a few minutes ago. That's where things like values or job blueprints are so important because yes, it's still a person. We're still humans. There's still emotion. But ultimately, when we have those things to lean back on, the conversation isn't based on opinions or subjectivity or it should help get rid of like recency bias. It's based on these agreed upon standards for how we treat each other, behave, how we work, values, and it's based upon the role expectations and what is required in that role. And so it gives something objective to measure against. And so I think that's what it looks like. I know that was a lot, but it's just being clear in what you're saying. It's not having hope that certain things don't come up as a plan because that's not a plan. It's being accountable, being humble where possible, where relevant, pertinent, leaning into things such as values and blueprints, and just avoiding ambiguity at all costs. That's just going to hurt everyone later.
Yeah. When you were talking, I had this flashback to a movie, the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt and Jonah
Yeah.
Hill. And Brad Pitt's telling Jonah Hill, like, they're doing this role play where he's like, you're going to have to cut one of these guys one day. Right. And so he's like, let's practice, And so Brad Pitt's like, you've got to cut me. How are you going to do it? And he's like, Jonah Hill's character, he says, you've been really good for the team. We really loved having you here. And this was a tough decision, but, we've got to cut you. And Brad Pitt's character is like, what? Why are you cutting me? Like, I just moved here, man. My kids are in school. What are you going to do? And he's like, I'm sure that's tough. And he's like, stop, right? Because these guys are professionals, right? Do you want a slow death or do you want a bullet to the head? Just give it to them straight. And I think that the reason that popped into my head is because he's talking about people at the top of their level in Major League Baseball. We're talking about people who are supposed to be at the top of their level on a leadership team. And I think that these should be the conversations where CEOs lean into being the most clear with anybody. I would say that if you're talking to, the intern, the high school intern who's been working in the shop and, he's just kind of lacks some maturity and he's just really not ready for this position. And, don't go out and just make the guy feel like, he's a loser and he's never going to amount to anything. You got to cut him and he's gone and get out of here, right? So they're people. You still got to honor the people. But I think
Yeah.
honoring the person also means taking stock of this is a very competent, capable person. There's some real issues here. If we're at this level, we're talking about a role responsibility change, and it is a hard conversation.
Mhm.
Then we need to honor them by being clear, being really clear. And I'll give a real tangible example, and I think you would probably agree with me on this because it is so common where we go in and we're gonna have to take this person out of the sales manager position and just put them in a sales position. I see this quite a bit. Or we're gonna have to take this person. They've gotten to the kind of the point where we gave them a controller title, but they weren't really ready for it, and now we're starting to hit a ceiling. And we're realizing that we're not big enough to have a CFO over this person and continue to pay their salary. So we're going to have to kind of take back that controller title, and we're going to have to hire a new controller. But if they're willing, we'd really like them to stay on the accounting team. right? And I will ask because I've learned the hard way. I'll ask the question as we're preparing for this. So, what is the conversation going to go like around compensation?
Yep.
And they're like, I don't know if we have to cover that in this conversation. And I'm like, are you insane? Like
Uh-huh. But
this is the number one thing. This is the panic button that you're about to push on this individual when you start talking about a role change. And
mm-hmm.
you are going to do them the dishonor of not even preparing a response. Like, what is your position? Like, are you just hoping that they're going to look at their paycheck in 2 weeks and notice that it's light $300 and be okay with it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff where you alluded to the let's put our head in the sand and hope that it doesn't come up, right?
Yeah.
Like, go through, like, what are all the possible things that they might ask that we need to be prepared to answer, and we need to honor this person with an answer. Now, they may not like the answer, but it is a clear answer. Based on it's based on truth. It's based on what the business can afford. It's based on the market value for this position. If it's compensation related, it's clear in terms of the reason that you're going to have to be moved out of this position is because you've still got some growth to do as a leader, and here are the areas of leadership that you need to grow on. And by all means, I'll spend some time with you. Other people will spend some time with you. Maybe the person who's going to come in and fill your seat at the leadership team table, that's going to be part of their responsibility to spend some time with you. So if you want to grow in that area, the other thing that comes up a lot is this temporary, is this permanent,
Yeah.
right? And I think if you don't want to have the hardest conversation, the business owner is hoping that they will believe that it's temporary when all of the intent is it's permanent. And maybe after a while they'll just get used to this new role. Maybe they'll even like it better, and they'll never want to come back and fulfill that role that they had to leave. And I was like, is that a possibility? No, it's not a possibility. Then we have to tell them that, like,
Mm-hmm.
unless something really, really big changes, and for the kind of change that we're talking about, that is probably not realistic to expect within, inside of 2 or 3 years. So that's how I see it right now. If you want to go out and prove me wrong, I would love that. There would be nothing better than for me to be wrong about your ability to grow and address these issues and do it. But clarity around what is it going to cost this person financially, clarity around, like, how is this going to be communicated to everybody else? Is
Mm-hmm.
there going to be an announcement made? Am I going to have to leave my office? Is my title going to change? Am I going to lose my parking spot? Am I going to lose my company vehicle? These are all things that I have sat in the room and just kicked myself. It was like, we should have talked about that. Why didn't we?
Yeah.
I should have seen that this was going to come up. And now we're having to schedule a follow-up meeting, and I can tell you the way the follow-up meetings go. The follow-up meetings start, and they start to litigate the prior points because they don't feel like the decision is final. Well, the decision's final. We just did not prepare for all of the details surrounding the decision. But they can't help themselves because, like, I've got the audience. I need. My wife told me I got to get in there and fight for this job, right? And it never goes well. So, clarity. Be certain of what the questions are going to be to the extent you can, and prepare for them. Let me ask you a final question as we wrap up. I think you may have kind of answered this already, but I'll ask you to go into a little bit more detail. What is, and from your seat, you get to stand outside of this leadership team. You're a part of it. You're working with them, but you're also, have this unique perspective of kind of being at 5,000, 10,000 feet. So you can see the landscape a little bit more clearly. And when you see these decisions delayed, what are some of the real costs that you see of delaying these types of hard leadership conversations?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's oftentimes definitely financially related, but oftentimes much much greater than that. I think first thing that comes to mind, reference servant leadership a lot on this, and serving those that you lead well, which means caring for them as a person, not just as a title. And the reality is, let's kind of flip the script for a second. one of the first costs is it's on them, or they're the one feeling it, I should say. They're going to stay stuck. Um, Obviously, maybe not, I shouldn't say obviously, most of the time I would hope that the person on the other side of the table that we're making the decision for or speaking to, that leader, they know that there's something, right? They don't have their heads so far in the sand where they're like, all of this is news to me. Um, Maybe, 1 out of 10, but the reality is they know that there's challenge that they need to overcome. So when we are delaying those conversations, well, then it's just another day for them, another day to tread through the mud, trying to get better, but they're not. And obviously, this is assuming that it's an instance where there is that desire, there is that effort, there's just other challenges that we're facing. So I think the individual staying stuck and just hurting them in that way is something that I can't undermine. Leaders, CEOs all need to understand that. The other one is trust. I would say kind of trust and culture might go hand in hand here. Uh, there's this environment that is created where, well, I'm not really going to trust the standards that you say you're setting because he over there, he's not being held accountable to it. So I'm definitely not going to.
Mm.
And then I'm also not going to trust when you ask me to do this or tell me to do that or say I have this coming up in my role or whatever. It just becomes this super flexible lack of accountability culture where just standards are just a thought, maybe an idea, but it doesn't really matter. And you can't even, I don't know the way to quantify that because to the point you said earlier, it could absolutely have a direct result in people leaving, in team attrition. I also think that you could very easily argue it extends to clients and customers because they're also kind of trickling down. They're feeling the effects of these challenges. Yeah, if there is a pause, a reset, a shift, a role change, role reset, well, they're probably going to feel that as well, at least the customers and clients that are the most forward facing with that specific leader, that specific individual in the moment, if it is someone that's external facing. Yeah, they might see it as well in the moment, but kind of back to that question of what does it cost now versus, or can we afford it now versus can we not afford it long term? It's kind of the same thing. Our clients and customers are going to feel the inconsistency, right? They're going to feel the lack of accountability to the standards. And so I would rather have them see some changes now than see it long term as a result of what we're producing or a lack thereof. Um, and then, yeah, just I said this earlier, but I really do believe that the longer we sit on this, that opportunity to have a clear reset can just become this slowly eroded train wreck, and that can hurt the relationship, that can hurt the business, and it's back to that quote: if you have to do something eventually, go ahead and do it immediately. Yes, avoidance can feel easier in the moment, but it's usually the most expensive decision,
Yeah.
avoidance. So.
And John Maxwell has this concept he calls the leadership lid, which is the idea that a leadership team is never going to surpass the leadership capability of its leader. So if your leader's an 8, the leadership team is probably going to have a lot of 6 and 7s on it. It might have an 8. It's probably not going to attract a 9 because that person is, they're not going to typically be led by somebody who's got less leadership ability than they do. But his main point there is you can't exceed the ceiling of the leader. I think there's a similar dynamic at play when you have one person, like the person we've been talking about, who's, there has to be a role change. The hardest of all role changes. They're going to stay here. It's not so simple. In a lot of ways, firing them is kind of like black and white. Right? This is like we can't fire them in good conscience, but we also cannot keep them on the leadership team. And if you were to evaluate, let's say that the capability, capacity, functionality of the leaders individually, and let's say we've got 3 8s on the leadership team and we got 1 5, and the 5 is the one we're talking about. I think most people would say, well, you add up the 3 8s, that's 24, and you got the 5, that's 29. Divided by 4, we're not giving up that much, right? That brings us down, to like a 7 something, right? But I don't think the math works that way. I think it's 3 8s, and that 1 5 is like 3 5s. That 1 5 counteracts each one of the 3 8s. So you wind up with an average score something more like 6.5. That's the reality that I see when there's just
Yeah.
one individual who is that far off the other capacity of the people. And when we talk about cost, well, what's the cost of the organization over the next 2 to 3 years before this problem becomes so obvious that it has to be dealt with? Like you said, eventually it's going to have to be handled. So the cost of not handling it immediately is 3 more years of having a team operate at a 6.5 level instead of an 8 or an 8.5 level. And what's the cost of that? Well, not executing on your strategic plan, not achieving your financial goals, not continuing to improve the culture, not continuing to attract other leaders below the leadership team. Like, those costs, hard to put a number to, but if you tried hard enough, you could. And, you know, we're easily talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars
Sure.
that, you know, you go to one individual. The point of this whole thing of the hardest conversation, we're not talking about one individual. We're talking about
Right.
a cog in the leadership team that can't turn. And so it doesn't matter how hard we turn the input shaft, the output's never gonna reach its full potential because that gear is just missing. So
Yeah.
great conversation. I'm glad this is not one of those hard conversations. This was a lot more fun, right? This is great. We got to
I
look forward
agree.
to this today.
Yeah.
But we will have one of these coming up. So this is a great conversation for me. I can see myself bookmarking this podcast and coming back to it the next time, you know, that one of these is on my weekly calendar, because they don't get easier. Our encouragement to you, if you're listening, is these are things that are difficult, but as a leader, they're the things that you're called to do. This is why you were put there. And you've gotten used to doing a lot of other hard things in your life. This is just one more skill that you need to acquire if you struggle with it. So if you need help with that, this is what we do. We would love to come alongside you and your team, start to work through some of these really difficult things so that you can have the future for your company. It can have the impact on the world that you want it to have. If you're interested in the topic that we talked about today, want to take it a little bit further, I would say download the Leadership Guide. You can access it through the show notes or on the website. You can also subscribe to the Leadership Guide so that you'll get it in your inbox every time we release a new episode. And it'll be a good reminder for you. But also, nothing happens without action. You could sit and listen to this. Tommy and I could talk for another 4 hours. Nothing would change in the world. If you download the Leadership Guide, spend 30 minutes contemplating, reflecting, do a little bit of journaling, make a commitment to yourself, you'll actually have some change happen as a result. So that's our hope. Thanks again, Tommy, for spending your afternoon with me. I really appreciate it. It's great to spend some time with you. And we'll
Yeah.
see you
Appreciate you
next
having
week.
me.
Awesome.